Thanks everyone for coming. Nice to see so many people here. So yeah, my name's Neil. I'm a family physician in Singapore. Been here for about 9 years now. I'm based at Oslo Health. I'll talk a little bit more about us later. But in the past few years, I've always had a sort of a personal interest in longevity and healthspan medicine, and my practice has shifted increasingly in that direction in recent years. So we're doing a sort of series of talks with T Squared. So I spoke a week ago on strength training and the nutritional side. One of my colleagues is talking a bit more about menopause and hormones next week. So if you're not able to make those other talks and you want to ask me something that's slightly off topic here, please feel free to put your hand up and interrupt me. I think we're a small enough room here that we can make it a bit more conversational. And I know that there's certain points that Baron's going to chip in and talk a little bit more from the T Squared perspective as well. So, I mean, you're probably seeing and hearing the word longevity being used more and more now, almost as much as a marketing tool as a sort of meaningful medical term. So why is that happening? It's because we're really entering a new frontier in medicine. So medicine 3.0 is a phrase coined by Peter Attia to describe this shift to a more personalized precision form of medicine. So the idea that medicine 1.0 was early changes like sanitation and vaccinations, which actually did a huge amount to increase human lifespan, way more than pharmaceuticals have. In recent years, we've got much better at keeping people alive in emergencies. But as we've enabled people to live longer chronologically, we've seen the increase of chronic diseases and reduced health spans. So the next frontier is trying to tackle these things. It's a hot topic. I don't put these 3 Netflix series up because I necessarily agree with everything they say. But these may be things that you've come across and you've seen a shift in the media here to start talking about longevity, so things like the blue zones, and talking about precision medicine and biohacking and things people are trying to do to improve their own health span and longevity. These are still often at an early stage. There's often some controversy surrounding them. So some people feel that the blue zones aren't really blue zones and more a result of poor administration, incorrect birth certificates, and pension fraud. And I suppose a lot of my job when I sit down with patients is trying to help them see what's viable now, what might be available in the future, and what's just complete hocus pocus nonsense.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So on this one, quick kind of raise of hands. In terms of life expectancy, do people know what it is in Singapore, KL, roughly? Just you can shout out a few answers.
Yeah, it's 85 here in Singapore.
So in Malaysia, it's sort of 78 to 80. In Singapore, it's about 82, 84. That's the life expectancy. But in terms of health span, the health span expectancy is 62. So there's about a 20-year gap that most of us face in terms of how old we are versus how old we are until we're healthy, and then it starts to deteriorate. And so a couple of markers in that space is grip strength. And the reason that's important in terms of longevity and age and training as you get older is one of the highest causes of death as you age is through fractures. So when you have a fall, I think the number was 40 or 50% chance of not going past 1 year after the age of 60 if you had a fall.
Yes, following a hip fracture. Yeah.
Following a hip fracture. And the reason is it's not the hip fracture itself, but the immobility, the blood clotting, and the subsequent chronic diseases that then come on from the onset of that. And so going down the strengthening and improving your health span is really when you do have a fall, can you brace yourself? Are your muscles ready? Are you ready? Is your reaction time ready? And so what we're trying to do is close that gap between 62 years of health span versus 82 years of lifespan. And that's sort of where a lot of what today is going on towards in the space.
Okay. So what do when we talk about aging as a disease, because this is essentially what longevity medicine aims to do. It aims to treat the aging process itself as a disease. What do we actually mean? Well, there are 12 or 13 cellular hallmarks of aging. I'm not going to give you an in-depth science lesson and go through every one of these. But it's important to say that when we talk about aging, we're not necessarily talking about cancer or heart disease. These might be things that increase with age, but they're not in themselves aging processes. There's something going on at a more fundamental level than that. So one thing I like to sort of tell patients when we're talking about aging is, if we cured all cancer tomorrow, there was no more cancer in the world, our life expectancy had increased by about 3 years, which isn't, considering that curing cancer has long been considered the holy grail of medicine, isn't that impressive. And the reason being, of course, is that if you're old and you don't die of cancer, you invariably die of something else. So if we really do want to improve longevity in a log fashion, we're going to have to target aging, and that process is going to have to begin much sooner in our lives. We can't really wait for people to get sick, because by that point, these processes, chronic inflammation, dysbiosis, mitochondrial dysfunction, they're already happening. And so what we're trying to do is target these processes. People talk a lot about the difference between biological age and chronological age. So chronological age is what it says in your passport, how old you are in years. Biological age is how old your body really is. What I'm trying to explain to people is that there probably isn't one biological age. So we have different aging clocks that we can use to measure someone's biological age. And it's possible to be different ages on different biological clocks. For example, you might have a healthier gut than you do an immune system. And so when we do things like epigenetic aging tests for some of our patients, everyone gets very excited about the number. So I got a guy's results this morning. He's 57, his biological age is 59. I know he's going to be disappointed with that because he works really hard. But what I'm more interested in is the data that got us there. Okay, yeah, the number's easy to remember and we'll work on that. But it's actually the process and the journey.
Do you want to share your age?
It depends what clock you use. My favorite is the biomarker one because I'm 27 on my biomarker. It's less good on some of the other ones. Have you done yours?
I have. I'm nowhere near that. I am my age, which I'll take as a win at the moment.
Well, I could be offended. You don't know how old I am. 27 might be, 27 might be really old. So we've talked already a little bit about Healthspan. Does anyone think they know what Healthspan means?
Or just terms or guesses on how would you define it for yourselves?
As long as you're healthy, for how long you're healthy, I suppose, until your health becomes chronically ill.
Yeah.
So chronic.
So that's a reasonable definition. One of the problems is we don't have a definition. So there was a literature search published recently that found 160 different definitions of healthspan. So when Varun talks about that gap between healthspan and lifespan, it depends how you define it. The Singapore government define it as years lived without disability. And then they have a list of disabilities. I think for at Osler and for our patients, I think disability is quite a low bar. I think we should be trying to set it higher.
Optimization.
Yeah. So I think for me, Healthspan would mean years lived with high vitality and optimal health, being able to do all the things that you want to do in your life, not just living without a disability. Does anyone know what lifestyle medicine is? So I don't really like the term, but it is what it is. So I'm a board certified lifestyle medicine physician. Lifestyle medicine uses 6 pillars. So T-Squared has 3 pillars. Everyone has pillars these days, but lifestyle medicine uses 6 key pillars to treat and prevent chronic diseases. So it's not just me saying, have you thought about exercising more? Or did you know that fruits and vegetables are really good for you? We're actually using lifestyle prescriptions and interventions to try and help people manage diseases. It's not that we're against pharmaceuticals and using drugs when we need to, but most of it comes back to this. And I hate to break it to you, but in the longevity space, this is 80 to 90% of the game. optimizing these things. I'm not going to be able to reveal to you today some magic supplement that you can start taking that's going to do better than all of this stuff. Now, it's not that we don't talk about the other things as well, but if someone's not optimizing, and I say optimizing deliberately, I don't mean that everything has to be perfect, but if you're not exercising at all, the idea that taking any kind of pill is going to make up for that is I think, misguided.
And I would say it's a bit of the power law. There's a cadence. So it's sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And once you follow one, it leads on to the next. And that virtuous cycle, it's habit forming. And once you get into a habit of good sleep and exercise, the rest of your sort of vices or the portion controlling and not being optimal on each one, they tend to fall into place. So an anecdotal example, how many people here love a drink? Love a drink after 8 p.m. as a wind down to the day. So in the spirit of sleep, good sleep, and with all our trackers, if you're trying to go for a 100 score on Aura, which is almost unheard of, your heart rate between 46 to 50 is how you get close to good sleep at night. You have a large meal, an Indian meal with all of the sodium, or 2 glasses of wine, your heart rate at night will be between 56 to 65. And so a difference in 15 beats per minute in your heart rate. So whilst you might sleep well, you wake up lethargic. Whilst you might be as strong in the gym the next day, your fourth set, your third set, where you actually get the results for improvement in performance, your endurance goes down. And so it's sort of behaving, kind of cutting off earlier. We kind of say anything during daylight is acceptable. We won't go down to what Brian Johnson says, where his last meal is at 11:30 a.m. I think that's a little extreme for all of us. So we all start somewhere, so by daylight. And ironically, even in terms of training, while consistency is important, for good sleep, you should have, and we'll come to it in some of the future slides on habit forming, but you don't want to have too many stimulants at night. So whether that's loud music, going out, drinking, even working out at 10, 11 p.m. If that's your only choice, it's better than nothing. But earlier in the day, the more time you give yourself to wind down, which in turn repairs the body either for chronic diseases and or for performance in the gym the next day, which again has virtuous benefits across the board through the different pillars.
It's still just about daylight outside.
Yeah,
So
so we see a few wine glasses.
Squeeze a drink in, you're still good, don't worry about it. Okay, so the topics for this evening, sort of within that 6-pillar framework, was stress and sleep. I'm happy to sort of go off piste onto other things if they want to, but let's start with those. So, what is stress? Stress has a negative connotation as a physiological process in the body that causes a flight or fight response, but not all stress is bad. So as doctors, we talk about sort of positive stress that drives people on to do things that are important, negative stress that is counterproductive, and eustress, so stress that's neither positive or negative, it's just there in your life and you manage it. I think the problem that I see in a lot of my patients is chronic unmanaged stress. Life shouldn't be completely without stress, but it's when it's left unattended to over a long time that it seems to have an impact. So the flight or fight response is extremely important. And we know from the animal kingdom that when a gazelle's being chased by a cheetah or a lion in the savannah, that flight or fight response can be the difference between life or death. The difference is when the lion goes away, the animal's physiology returns to normal extremely quickly. The gazelle's back down to a normal resting heart rate within about 5 minutes of being chased by the lion. It's almost like it never happened. And I think one of the problems for humans is we don't find it quite so easy to let go of our stress. And our stresses aren't being chased by lions, it's far more day-to-day stuff. That's when it starts to have a negative impact. So a lot of what I work on with patients is not about removing stress from their lives. It's nice if we can do that in certain areas, but the idea that they're all going to have a stress-free life in Singapore is not realistic for most of them. So it's how do they become resilient to stress, and how do they keep their performance at the top level despite being very stressed? I know this is something that you wanted to come in on a bit, Varun.
Yeah, so in terms of stress, we look at it as 2 or 3 different ways. The first one is when you're exercising, in whatever shape or form that is. There is something to be said about when you're challenging yourself, you're single-minded and you're performing that rep, that set, just essentially sometimes trying to survive that hour on the back end. Nobody loves heavy squats, nobody loves lunges. But in that moment, what happens is you get a bit of mental clarity. It's despite your best efforts to think about the stress, what meeting you have later, what call is scheduled for the night. In those few moments, you're not thinking about anything else but the exercise. And that's sort of the release you get about not having that fight or fight for the stresses that harm you, but having a fight or fight in a positive manner to still kind of, a lot of us, when we work hard, have this attitude of kind of overcoming the challenge, achieving a certain alpha mentality. And so applying that in a positive manner is what we want to redirect everyone's energy to, and give that hour or so just to release, sweat it out, and all the hormones that come alongside that release, in turn, then have a good positive impact on the rest of your day.
Yeah, so this is what I mean when in lifestyle medicine, when we talk about flow activities, some people talk about the zone, doesn't matter. It's this idea that the mind's so distracted that I know that can come from exercise. And there are certain sports and exercises that have always, things like surfing and snowboarding have always had a more sort of spiritual connotation to them, the type of people who practice these sports. And that's probably because when you're hurtling down a wave or a mountain so fast, you can't really be worried about your mortgage payments or your work day tomorrow, because you've got to be so focused on the task. But it can come from lifting heavy weights. It can come from non-exercise sources. So probably one of the reasons ice baths, that kind of thing, very extreme experiences have this sort of spiritual effect on people, is because they become very in the moment. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, I was chatting with some of the audience members. Someone was telling me that for them it's journaling. They know if they have a day where they don't do that for themselves, the stress is going to be more poorly managed. So it doesn't. I mean, I suspect Varun and I is slightly biased towards exercise, because that's probably one of the tools that we use to manage our own stress, but it doesn't really matter. It's about what works for you.
And I think the last point I'll add on this is, in terms of building a resilient body, from a men's health perspective, or something I went through personally last year, you tend to lose 1% of body mass every
Muscle
year.
mass.
Muscle mass, sorry.
Unfortunately, body mass goes down.
Yeah, body mass goes up rather, but your muscle mass goes down, which is not an ideal combination. Along with my testosterone was last year about 380, which is about average for someone in their mid to late 30s. With a year of working on an exercise, again, it doesn't have to be weight training, but the reason I do it is to keep the muscle mass up. You'd rather build a strong foundation, so as you're losing it, you're replenishing it, or at least having a higher starting base, so that as it goes down, it doesn't have the deteriorating impact. But just by kind of focusing on training and being consistent, not even heavy weights, just consistency more than the real sure outcome, my testosterone went back up to about 700 in a span of 6 months. And that's a knock-on effect on chronic disease, just across the board. Hence the building a resilient body, which is also great for stress-free management.
Okay, so yeah, following on from that, because most people can agree that being stressed isn't enjoyable, it's not a nice experience, but does it really impact your longevity and your health? And if so, how does it do it? There is research to back this up. It's harder to measure than the research around things like exercise and longevity, because stress in a research setting is harder to measure than something like grip strength or VO2 max. It's more based on asking people about their own perceptions of stress, which vary. But we know that people with chronic stress have accelerated cellular aging. So telomeres, which are like the protective caps on the end of our chromosomes, which telomere shortening is one of the hallmarks of aging. We know that stress accelerates that. Increased inflammation, another one of the hallmarks on that circle I showed you, they call that inflammaging. and inflammation and immune system dysregulation is affected by cortisol. We know that people with high levels of stress have increased risk of cardiovascular disease, and there's some evidence linking chronic stress to increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. So it does impact your longevity, and it is hard to fix, but I think it's worthy of our attention. What Varun alluded to with the stress and hormone piece, we see a lot both on the male and the female side. So I know Tash is talking in another talk about menopause, but a classic example of this would be highly stressed women, whether it's psychological stress or physical stress. So we see it in athletes who are training too intensely. What happens? Periods stop. That's because of a hormone downregulation. What happens in men? Testosterone drops. And that's probably has some evolutionary purpose. So in our evolutionary past, when we were going through a flight or fight response, the body would deprioritize reproduction. So I'm not going to worry about procreation right now, I'm going to worry about survival, and then I'll turn those hormones back on when the stress goes away. The problem is the stress doesn't go away, so the hormones never get turned back on. So it definitely does have a hormonal impact and a performance impact. So I'm going to move on from stress to sleep now. We're doing okay. Sleep, although it's slots into those 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine, some would argue that it should be in the middle because it's sort of the foundational one. It's hard to address the other 5 if sleep isn't as good as it can be. On the athletic side, so to bring the T-squared side of things into it, we know that sleep's really important for athletic performance, right?
Across the board. So we've seen that anything under 7 hours, 8 hours, your performance will deteriorate. You can supposedly keep up 4 to 6 hours a night of sleeping for a window of 1 week, but everything after that, your body temperature, your strength, your endurance falls off a cliff. Your progress. More than that, how many times have we, on a nutrition basis, ate perfectly till about 11 p.m., turned on Netflix, and we're 2 bags of food down? And that kind of stress response at night to eat, the lack of sleeping, it has a knock-on effect across the board. And so one thing we say as a power law, have the sleep as the foundation of essentially your entire longevity basis. In terms of training, what's the purpose of sleep outside of you have to be fresh to kind of power through the workout? Sleep is when your body repairs. So even when we touched upon ice baths earlier, a small anecdote on how stress and sleep relate to repair. When you go work out and you lift weights, you're actually damaging your muscles. Your muscles then become inflamed, and that inflammation is the body repairing itself. That repair function is how you get more muscle mass, which kind of counters the aging process. That repair mechanism, if you don't sleep, when does your body repair itself? And so despite your best efforts to go, I'm training 4 times a week, I'm eating perfectly, but I'm sleeping 4 hours, great, you're damaging yourself. You might be okay on nutrition, but even the nutrition you're having, when is it that your body can use it to fuel yourself? So that's why sleep is sort of the fundamental foundation of anything in the longevity basis.
Yeah. I don't know if you come onto this, but on here it specifically says deep sleep for that.
Yeah.
Do you get on to how?
Yeah, hold that thought.
I'll
It's
pass it
coming.
over.
Yeah, it's coming. I did want to talk, specifically. I've dedicated a little bit of time to the sleep stages because I think it's important to work out what's what there. How many people wear something that tracks their sleep?
Okay, most of the room.
Okay, more than half, maybe. How many people get stressed when their sleep tracker tells them stuff they don't want to hear? Yeah. So it can be a double-edged sword, can't it? But I see, the role of sleep in recovery being more acutely demonstrated to people with the advent of sleep trackers. So people see their heart rate variability change. When I wear continuous glucose monitors, if I've had a bad night's sleep, my glucose control is less good than it is on a normal day. There's at least one whoop band here. Stress gauges and recovery scores all go out of whack. So I think people are now seeing more acutely than they did in the past the effect of their lifestyle choices on their sort of wearable data. So I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail about the stages of sleep, because yeah, I think sometimes people say, oh, there's REM sleep and there's deep sleep and there's light sleep, and you know, I just need more deep sleep. They'll show me their sleep data and they'll focus on the deep sleep, because in sort of non-medical terms, deep sleep sounds like the most important, doesn't it? You know, when you say someone's sleeping deeply, that's generally implied to be a good thing. But the reality is different things happen in the different stages, and we kind of need them all. So the body cycles through stages of sleep around every hour and a half. So if you're getting what we would hope would be a full night's sleep, you're going to go through these sleep cycles multiple times. It's not like there's just one overarching sleep cycle for the whole night. The first stage is really a preparation stage. So light non-REM sleep is sort of the transition phase between wakefulness and sleep. Brain waves begin to slow and the muscles start to relax, but the person is still very easily rousable at that stage. Heart rate and body temperature start to drop, but you will get these things called sleep spindles, occasional bursts of rapid activity. And we think light sleep does have its own benefits. It's not simply just a transition to get you to REM and deep sleep. It's where certain memory consolidation happens. So especially for simple tasks and skills, so sort of repetitive learning and that kind of thing will be affected by light sleep. Then we move on to deep sleep, and the sleep scientists will subcategorize this further. But the deepest stage of non-REM sleep, and how do we know when someone's in this stage? Well, if you're doing a sleep study and measuring their brain waves, we see these delta waves, so really deep waves on the somnograph. This is when it's hardest to wake someone up, and it's really, really important for the physical recovery side of things. So muscle repair and hormone release. Varun mentioned just now about his testosterone levels and what they were on blood tests. When someone comes to see me for a testosterone level, if they come in the afternoon, I have to tell them to come back for the blood test in the morning. We measure testosterone at 8 to 9 a.m. because that's when it's at its peak, because it's comes after a good night's sleep. Same with growth hormone as well. So if you don't get a good night's sleep, it'll never be there. And so I can tell you, as someone who's worked nights in earlier parts of my career, that testosterone sort of just isn't kicking around in the system if you don't sleep. There's evidence that immune function comes with this deep sleep and recovery, and sort of factual learning. So not so much the simple repetitive tasks, but people who are revising for exams or consolidating much more detailed information need deep sleep for that to happen. REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movements, is the one that most people have heard of. Most vivid dreaming occurs during this stage. And the brain almost looks like it's awake when you're in REM sleep. So the body is still very much paralyzed, but the brain is very active at this point. It's postulated, although I don't think definitively proven, that a lot of creative thinking and problem solving happens in this stage. So it allows us to come up with creative solutions to problems, not so much creative as in artistic, I mean sort of problem solving. It seems particularly important for managing emotions and stress. And so it's not that you need, it's not that one of these is the key sleep stage or the one that we all need to be aiming for. It's that we need all stages of sleep, and we need a healthy 4 to 6 sleep cycles through a night to get there. Interestingly, I mean, this is where smoking and alcohol sort of come into sleep. So, and caffeine as well, actually. So the problem with all these things is that they bind receptors. So smoking, for example, binds nicotine receptors. The issue when it comes to sleep is the time it takes for those receptors to unbind. So the half-life of nicotine is 4 hours, I think.
Coffee's, I think, 8.
Coffee's 8. So it's the opposite way around, right? So caffeine you want out your system. The problem with smoking comes that you have a cigarette, you go to bed, 4 hours later, the nicotine receptors become unbound. and the brain signals the need for more nicotine. It wants those receptors to be bind because the person's addicted to nicotine. And so they wake up slightly. They may wake up completely. We see that more with vaping now. The vapes are so strong that people physically wake up and have to vape. And again, with caffeine, you've got it the other way around, right? So people have consumed caffeine after lunchtime. The receptors are still bound and they can't fall asleep. Alcohol wears off halfway through the night. That's the problem. It helps you get to sleep, but then it wears off and the body wakes up again.
And I think that's the same thing that your sleep trackers will show. You might feel like you've had a good sleep, but any stimulant, nicotine, alcohol, it shows up in your scores. And I think in the same thing in terms of training. Interestingly, any training, whether it's flow straight, yoga, personal training with us, across the board, any sort of movement, the more movement you have consistently, the more balanced sleep you get through different cycles. The more sedentary you are, the lighter your sleep in some sense, and the quicker you wake up, and it's not really going through its full functions, full repairs. So having some moderate exercise definitely helps get all the different ranges of sleep cycles. Again, if you do it too late, at midnight, 11 p.m., like me tonight after, probably not the best, but we all have our vices.
So what do we do to, it's all very good talking about how great sleep is for us, but often when I see patients who are struggling with this, like, okay, well, I know that, but I can't, I can force myself to exercise, I can force myself to eat better, but I can't force myself to go to sleep. So what do I do? Because it's a subconscious thing, right? So there are some non-medical strategies. I'll talk a little bit about supplements and medications as well, but there are some important non-medical strategies. So the body craves routine. We have an internal circadian clock, which loves it when we go to bed and wake up at the same time each day. So that's the reason why jet lag is so disruptive. So having a consistent sleep and wake time, even at weekends if you can, would be really helpful. Getting some sunlight, and it seems like low angle sunlight, morning and evening are the most important times to get sunlight into your eyes and into those receptors at the back of the retina. Particularly important when you're jet lagged to try and get that sunlight exposure to help you get into the new time zone. Sleep hygiene. So we're not talking about cleaning your bedroom and making your bed, although you can do those things. It's about getting rid of disruptive or unclean sleep practices. So we generally say that the bed and the bedroom should be for sleep and sex only, not for checking emails, not for social media, not having a TV on the wall if you can avoid it. So it's one of the challenges I saw with the shift to work from home during the pandemic was a lot of people were moving the office into the bedroom, and that seemed to be really unhealthy. People get obsessed with screen time, and I agree it's a bad idea before bed. But I think it's more than just the light from the screen. So everyone talks about blue light, and can you wear glasses, or can you change the settings on your phone to improve that? But it's what your phone is, it's the stimulation your phone is giving you. So we don't see as much of a problem with people watching TV, even though that's a screen. It's a light box in the corner of the room. Now, some of that may be the distance from the screen, that might be important. But the other thing is that TV is a passive exercise. It's not directed at you. You're watching something on Netflix. The algorithm may have told you to watch it, but it wasn't made for you as an individual. The problem with checking emails or social media seems to be the scrolling through Twitter or whatever he's calling it these days, seems to be the direct stimulation as much as the blue light. So I would say that kind of screen time is a particular no for me. Optimizing the environment, so the darker the room, the better. Most humans, regardless of where they grow up, seem to be dialed into a pretty narrow temperature range at what's optimal for sleep. So most people will set their air conditioning to a surprisingly narrow window. Cooler seems to be better, quieter, obviously. If there's traffic roaring past outside, that's not going to help.
So just on the cooler seems better. The sauna is great to calm you down, and so that does help in the evenings. But to go to bed, a cold air conditioning in sort of the 18 to 22 range, sometimes 16 to 22 if you're in Singapore, but generally cold aircon, but warm environment prior, is what helps get to sleep well. In terms of how long, so if I really want to unwind from work and I want to watch TV, what should we do? Because we can't be perfect, right? So really optimizing the best we can, not being the best. Otherwise, it wouldn't be consistent. Generally, what is a good habit that we see is 1 hour prior to sleep, come up with a sleep routine. So if you are going to watch TV, do it, but an hour before going to bed, turn everything off and figure out what that routine is, whether it's reading a book, something that is not stressful, is more just creative or relaxing. And so a book is less stimulating than TV, which is far less stimulating than an email, obviously. And so figuring out what your last 1 hour routine is what it's about for us.
Yeah. So a couple of myths just to debunk. So this idea that you can catch up, sleep scientists call it repaying a sleep debt. You can a little bit, but probably no more than about 2 hours. So this idea that you can lie in till midday at the weekend and then that will remedy all the ill effects of the sleep you missed out on the week just isn't true. You can probably manage to catch up 1 to 2 hours. Anything more than that is going to have no benefit. A lot of people say caffeine doesn't affect their sleep until they wear a sleep tracker and then realize it does. So just because you can fall asleep after a double espresso after dinner doesn't necessarily mean that it's not having an impact. This is where the sleep stages come into it. And the proportion of people who can function on 4 or 5 hours of sleep is extremely low. Probably rounded to a whole number, it's 0. So just because you can get out of bed and get through your day doesn't mean that you're functioning
In fact,
optimally.
if you sleep for about 2 hours in a day or go a night without sleeping, the hormones medically, it's the same as being drunk. That's your cognitive level after a sleepless night. So yes, we strive as, when we're in our young 20s, first on a job or a new role, that we want to outperform and run overnighters. It sounds good, but if you really want to perform well, whether at work or outside in personal life, get your sleep. Your outcome in the hours that you are awake will be far better with far fewer mistakes than if you try and pull a late night. And I think that's the other last 1 hour habit where nighttime Bruin comes on. And whatever I have to address, whatever I forgot, I may write it down for tomorrow, but I will not address it in the evening because allowing myself to kind of cognitively repair, I'll perform better the next day than whatever this email at 11 p.m. needs to go out, essentially. So it's habit breaking and habit forming. So don't be drunk at work with a sleepless night, essentially. Or have a sleepless night if you don't drink and are craving it.
I think this is a particular challenge I see in Singapore. So a lot of my patients work for global companies, do regional roles, that kind of thing. And Asian time zones are not prioritized in global companies. And so, they may have sort of calls with Europe late afternoon, move on to the East Coast, then move on to the West Coast. And that's an issue and that's a tough one to solve, right? People have still got to do their jobs. But all I would do is encourage you, if you are in a position of authority or superiority in your business, think about the people on those calls and do what you can to help them either not happen at all or shift them to, a limited number of days in the week so that they can try and recover on other days.
Or work around it. So prior to an 11 p.m. midnight call with the States, get a nap in, or that hour you would give yourself, do something prior to the call just to unwind a little so that your body gets to relax and the stress is out of the system. So you're still working on that call, but not in a manner that you'd be stressed from 8 a.m. all the way to midnight. So find pockets just to reset yourself when you can, because once you get off the call, the more reset you are, the easier that you will fall back to sleep and your body will kind of regulate itself.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So I get asked about supplements a lot, and probably the area of supplementation alongside longevity that I get asked about the most is sleep. What can I take that's natural to help me to sleep? First of all, I should say that these should be tools rather than crutches that you rely on. The idea that there's any supplement that you can take that's going to fix a broken sleep is probably not realistic. But some people can find these really helpful augmenters of their sleep. Melatonin is probably the one that people have heard about the most. It's a synthetic version of a natural hormone that's produced in the brain, and it prepares the body for sleep. So it doesn't really have a sedative effect. It signals to the body that sleep is coming. So in natural melatonin is signaled by things like it going dark and our natural circadian clock. So melatonin, I find it quite helpful to recover from jet lag and that kind of things. Got lots of patients who take it who find it not helpful at all. So with all of these, it's a case of sort of try it and see. There is some concern amongst some doctors that because melatonin is a hormone, are we suppressing natural production? So there are some hormones like testosterone that if you give them for long enough to someone, you'll eventually naturally suppress their ability to produce natural testosterone. I'm not aware of any really good evidence that that's the case with melatonin, but out of the precautionary principle, we often advise people to not take it continuously for a very long time. Although there's plenty of data showing people taking it for a few months at a stretch without too much of a problem. It's more a question of does it work for you or not. I think it's particularly useful in certain situations like jet lag.
So on things like that, if someone's taking melatonin and they've been taking it for a couple of years, but they take it a couple of times a week for a couple of years, and it works, is that the kind of thing where you're like, hang on, you've been taking that too long and there's that risk that you described?
It's a tough one, right? Because there's nothing. It's very difficult to measure anything in that person to prove that it's harmful, and there's no great data to suggest that it is. The other thing I would say is melatonin as a supplement isn't going anywhere. So if you are a little bit dependent on it, it's not like we're going to run out of melatonin pills tomorrow. It wouldn't be my preference for someone to take it long term. But if they had been, and we'd optimized everything else, and we'd had a conversation about the pros and the cons, and they wanted to continue taking it, it's not a sort of hill I'd be willing to die on, and say, look, this is an absolutely terrible idea. There are sleep medications that I would have that conversation around, because we can talk about those that I think are actively harmful. But I'm not sure melatonin's in that category of being completely unsafe. Then following on from that, I mean, I've just included the ones that I often get asked about, but there are a whole host more. Sorry.
Just before we move on, so melatonin, the kind of the dose
Yes.
is very hugely between supplements. So
It's a good question. So it seems like it's one where more isn't necessarily better. So you can get 10 milligram melatonin pills in Guardian here, no prescription, dissolve under your tongue. It doesn't seem that they work any better than taking 2 or 3 milligrams. So I normally encourage people to take a lower dose. And if they find that it wears off too quickly, they get to sleep but they wake up later on, they can take a controlled release version. So there's supplements like Circadian, which is 2 milligrams controlled release. Sounds like a small dose, but it works just as well as the 10 milligram ones. So I would say that more is not necessarily better with melatonin. And in Asia, you can buy quite alarmingly high doses sometimes. But if you have the 10 milligram ones, you can break them into quarters. They last a bit longer.
So tiny dose.
Yeah, I know. You end up just with a sort of powder of melatonin. We've all been there. These other ones are not things that natural hormones in the body. These are mainly botanicals that people take to help them sleep. So magnesium, a really popular one. Whether it affects sleep directly or affects stress and then helps people to sleep better is not quite clear. I think the type of magnesium you take is important. So I often see people taking magnesium citrate, which is quite good for gut regulation because it mainly stays in the gut. It's not brilliantly absorbed by the body, so it's probably not going to have much of an impact on your sleep. Magnesium glycinate is probably the better option in that regard. If you're a bit more of a biohacking enthusiast and you don't mind spending a bit more money, then magnesium threonate is purported to cross the blood-brain barrier in larger amounts and have a more direct effect on sleep. It's a little bit more expensive than glycinate. Magnesium is something that the body is great at filtering out the excess. So it would be very hard for you to overdose on magnesium. So I'm happy with people taking, if they've got 250 or 400 milligram pills, they could take that 2-3 times a day quite safely and not worry about it too much. That doesn't mean I want people just taking stuff, it becomes pointless after a while. But it's difficult to go too high on magnesium, and particularly as we get older, there is evidence that a lot of us are missing out on optimum levels. There's others on there, so theanine, ashwagandha, which again is often used as a stress management tool, lemon balm extract. You can try any of these. Most of them have pretty good safety data on them. What I would generally avoid is trying all 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 of them at once, because if they work, you won't know which one works for you, and it's probably not all of them. So there is a bit of trial and error involved here. And what a lot of the supplement companies do to try and differentiate themselves is they roll these into a combined pill, which is fine, it's not dangerous, but it's harder to tell what's working.
And these are all sleep supplements or supplements for the general like workout and other things as well?
So they're all marketed as sleep supplements. I would say that things like melatonin and theanine probably more directly impacting sleep in itself. Things like ashwagandha and magnesium may be helping people feel more relaxed, and then that enables them to get to sleep better. Because sleep is so foundational for longevity, you will often see these as ingredients in so-called longevity supplements as well. So there's one question is, what are they sold as? And I guess another question is, what do they actually do?
The one I would,
So my follow-up question would be, and this is again not for sleep, but for workout, like things like creatine.
Yeah.
Is that good? Is it bad?
so creatine's evolved, and the literature around creatine's evolved, along with for working out and bodybuilding or even personal training for performance. So before trying GH, testosterone, if you're not taking creatine, you're losing out on a number of just easy, low-hanging fruit for performance gains. Typically, this is about 20 years ago. For performance, the creatine cycle used to be a cycle, which was have 20 to 30 milligrams for a week so that your body gets saturated with it, and then have 5 to 10 grams daily to keep your body at that level. And then you would cycle every 6 to 8 weeks because there's a lot of creatine in your system. New literature is showing that creatine has benefits not just for personal training and performance, but just across the board for health reasons, and you don't need to cycle it. So it's personal, but anywhere between 2.5, 5, 7.5 grams, just as your daily supplement of vitamin C and creatine. You can have it on a daily basis. It won't saturate your blood system, and you will see a lot of performance benefits. Some of the performance benefits and the way it works is it helps your muscles absorb water, which essentially is hydration. More hydrated, better performance across the board. So that's sort of the pathways, not a non-medical term. I'm sure Dr. Neil can expand on that, but from a training, but also literature that we look at and apply for our clients, we're seeing that a shift of creatine becoming a daily supplement, helping across the board for both training, performance, and longevity. So you'll see, for example, again, not pushing any one supplement, but Brian Johnson, who's done a lot of self-testing, his daily supplement now includes 2.5 grams of creatine as his longevity morning mix. Again, a pinch of salt because it's all moving, but generally creatine as a base level supplement. Even prior to that, I would just buy pure creatine monohydrate, put it in my water, and then have that separate. Then I'd have a glass of vitamin C separate, which also helped me because then I was having a lot of water in some shape or form. So both hydration and as a supplement, it became my morning routine. So it's a daily supplement now.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. I take 5 grams of creatine a day. Not sure it'll make any difference to sleep, but beyond physical performance, maybe mental clarity seems to improve in some people as well. And it's cheap, it's easy to make. And so, yeah, with all of these supplements, I would say, coming back to the lifestyle medicine pillars, if your diet's terrible and you don't exercise, a scoop of creatine is not going to move the needle. But if you're doing all this other stuff and you think you're doing a pretty good job on it already, and you're looking to enhance or optimize, then I think that's absolutely fine. I mentioned medications at the bottom, not specifically, but of course there are medications to help you sleep. There are short-term sedatives that people take to essentially put them to sleep. Zopiclone, Zolpidem, that kind of thing. Massive downsides. They're all addictive, despite being marketed as less addictive. They are all addictive. Chemically induced sleep does not seem to be restorative in the ways that natural sleep is. And some of them have been tentatively linked to dementia and cognitive decline as well. So we use those medications sparingly in extreme situations where someone needs to sleep sort of right here, right now, but they're not long-term sleep strategies. There are some other medicines that are sometimes used that are not addictive and that are used long-term. There's a medicine called trazodone, which is a sort of really old-fashioned antidepressant, which we don't really use as an antidepressant that much anymore, but in low doses seems to help people sleep without necessarily interfering with those sleep stages, sleep architecture. It's not my preferred choice, but sometimes we have to have those conversations with people who've got themselves in a fair bit of trouble with their sleep. There's another newer medication called Dayvigo, which again is marketed as a pure sleep, non-addictive medication. It's quite expensive, and I've prescribed it. I've seen varying results with it. I'm not blown away with it, I have to say, but again, it can be a tool for some people. So there are pharmaceutical options there, but we prefer you not to use them if possible. So I
have a question.
Yeah.
I know it's not, we were talking about that sometimes life happens, jet lag,
Yeah.
late nights and too many glasses of wine at dinner and all that. What would you recommend? Any of these or a medication that 3 or 4 nights in a row and you need a good night's sleep?
So I think short-term sleep like out-and-out sedative medications like Zopiclone, Zolpidem, I do use in people who want to take it for jet lag. I guess the follow-up question would be, how often are you jet lagged? I've got patients who are jet lagged every other week, and I really don't want them taking a chemical sedative every other week. If you're going to use it a couple of times a year for big transatlantic trips, you're not going to get addicted at that level. It probably does help your body flip into the new time zone a little bit, so I'm kind of okay with that.
That doesn't interfere with the sleep cycle?
Oh yeah, it does, but the jet lag's already doing that. Yeah, so those nights sleep where you've used the medication are not going to be great sleep scores on your Oura Ring or anything like that, but they may be slightly improved, and it may help you adjust to the time.
Even from a training perspective, if you leave aside personal training for a second, just the overall consistency of training is important. And so if you're having some cross-Atlantic travel or 4 night outs, either do the weights but do a lighter weight, or do zone 2 cardio. And so just to keep it up, if you get on a bike, and you'll be shocked that sometimes zone 2, you look at your heart rate and go, I need to go slower. I can go faster, I'm able to. But just that steady movement gets the blood flowing, the sweat going. It'll either sweat out the alcohol, or with daylight and movement, your body tends to be forced into resetting itself. Also, when you fatigue yourself a little bit from exercise and not alcohol or jet lag, it wants to go back to sleep naturally. And so again, just that flow or movement, any movement across the board is beneficial, especially when you feel worse. But just tone down, it goes back to what we said earlier on the stress levels. So if your body's already stressed, pick an exercise or a movement that's not as stressful, but do the movement, it will help reset.
I should just say one final, I saw some people taking pictures of this slide. In case you're looking to buy any of these, L-theanine is just one to avoid if you have sleepwalking or night terrors. Can make those things worse. Slightly niche, but I should have put that on the slide, but I forgot.
I got a case study. So if let's say someone's an alcoholic, for years of being an alcoholic, drinks like 5 to 6 glasses of wine every night, red wine, it's like, this is normal glass, right? A normal pouring glass would be like that, but her glass is like that. 5 to 6 of those every single night. Tried melatonin, doesn't work, magnesium doesn't work, lemon balm doesn't work, but she responds well to Zolpidem. But we all know that Zolpidem should not be a long-term solution. So what would you recommend? she does tire herself out throughout the day, but she still can't sleep at night.
So,
unless she takes 5
so zolpidem's one of those medications that I mentioned that we try not to use beyond a week max, if that. Without going into too much detail on an individual case, it would be trying to address the alcoholism.
Yeah.
That's the problem, right? So thinking that we might be able to add on a medication to fix it. I mean, if you were if you're forcing me to make a choice, I might try shifting to something like trazodone or one of those other things that are sort of non-addictive and maybe a better long-term option. The problem when we know someone's consuming with alcohol is we've got to be careful about interactions. So I always sort of think, when you read in the newspaper about someone who's kind of freaked out on a plane, just done something really out of character and they've been arrested or thrown off, I wonder if it's often the case that they've taken a sleeping pill and then the drinks trolleys come down and they've had a bottle of wine as well. And either of those things on their own would have been okay, but the mix is very unpredictable from a psychiatric perspective. So I think when there's a medical condition causing the insomnia, it's always preferable to try and treat the underlying cause rather than sprinkle medication on top, because essentially the alcohol's already doing that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the synergy. So a lot of these things are sort of interlinked, right? So exercise is good for sleep and stress. Sleeping better helps you manage stress. If you sleep better, you'll feel more like exercising. So there is a virtuous circle here. Whereas if you can improve one thing, it might improve the other. Sometimes people see me and they're not exercising and they're having problems with their sleep, and I suggest that they might exercise more vigorously to tire themselves out. And they sort of say, well, that's cheating, isn't it? No, making yourself more tired so that you then have a better night's sleep is not cheating.
And the last thing on the exercise pillar, what's the ideal holy grail of exercising for longevity in a balanced environment? 2 weight sessions, 1 high intensity where your heart rate goes up for about 20 minutes, 15 minutes. So your ski ergs, your assault bikes, and 2 zone 2s. So that sounds like you're working out 5 times a week, but in those 5 times, you have 2 personal training or weight sessions, depending on if you know how to do it. And the other 3 are 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. So you're really looking at, in an hourly basis, about 3 hours in a week. And that the amount of change that will do to you is incredible. And if you look at it as bite size, 3 of those exercises being 20 minutes, that's again the piece of just being consistent. And so sleep, diet, and consistency, it's amazing what just the power laws and the fundamentals do for longevity and just overall body changes.
I mean, I 100% agree with that, and that's what we would aim for
Yes.
in our patients. But it's important to say that going from
Zero to 5
to
yes.
half an hour of exercise is beneficial. So if you're sitting there thinking, gosh, there's no way I can do 3 hours a week, just
Start with
do a
3,
little
15
bit more
minutes.
and build from there.
So if you're optimizing sleep alone, would you say that zone 2 every single day for 20 minutes or not?
So, no, on the basis that you're active and doing your 10,000 steps. If you're not, then yes. So it depends on how you're getting your movement in. The purpose of zone 2 is yes, cardiovascular, but it's also just not to be sedentary. So it depends on what your lifestyle is.
So there's a trend when I was looking online for sort of people talking about sleep. There seems to be a trend of extremely elite sports people being kind of obsessed with sleep. I only included Tom Brady and Roger Federer, but there were a whole bunch of Usain Bolt taking sort of 2-hour naps in the middle of the day, and LeBron James sort of having siestas, and it goes without saying that if you really are someone who aspires to be at the top level, not just in sport, in whatever you do in your life, then this is probably one of the key tools. So I did this for stress as well, because I want to link it back into longevity. Is there actually proof that sleep makes a difference to longevity. We talk about it being a good thing, just as we do with stress management, but is it actually going to impact your sort of health span? The data's interesting, so it seems to suggest that people who don't get enough sleep live shorter, unhealthier lives.